What do obscure plant species, constellations, and naked women have in common? They're all prominently featured in a 600-year-old book called the Voynich Manuscript, which has been baffling scientists for over a century. Why? Because the drawings of the plant stars and women are displayed in a 240-page medieval text alongside a language that remains absolutely indecipherable to this day. The world's greatest minds, from linguistics experts to wartime code breakers, have put their heads together and pored over the Voynich text for years. They've come no closer to understanding what language it's written in, what part of the world it's from, or if it's written in any language at all. So we're mobilizing our world-class team of researchers, scientists, and engineers to share the Voynich manuscript with our intelligent viewers and see if they can be the ones to solve the mystery. In 1912, a Polish book dealer named Wilfred Michael Voynich purchased an interesting-looking manuscript from a Jesuit library in Italy. Unable to understand what language it was written in, he asked academics to translate it, starting a frustrating century-long journey of code cracking, disproven theories, and furious infighting among the academic world. Some of the academics that studied the Voynich manuscript theorized that the whole thing might be a hoax. However, if it is, it's a very old hoax indeed. The book is made out of vellum, a specially treated animal skin, because the 15th century was a less vegan-friendly time. Radiocarbon dating performed on the animal skin pages show us that they were produced in the early 1400s. The journey of the book in the beginning of its existence remains somewhat of a mystery. Scholars know that at some point in the early 17th century, the book was owned by a member of the Habsburg court of Rudolf II in Prague, probably Rudolf himself. From the late 1600s to the late 1800s, it was stored at the Collegio Romano. This still leaves large lapses in time early on when the book's whereabouts and ownership are unaccounted for. Since Voynich reintroduced the book to the world, academics have argued wildly over what language it may be written in, if the book is instead a code, or if it's written in any real language at all. Part of the problem with deciphering the manuscript is that no one can seem to agree on one theory. The first major hypothesis about the book's origins came from an academic, Joseph Martin Feely, who believed it was the work of medieval scientist Roger Bacon. He believed that Bacon, for reasons unknown, chose to write this text in abbreviated medieval Latin, encoded in a substitution cipher. Apparently, the theory assumed that since this was before Netflix or the internet, people had way too much free time on their hands to write secret code books about plants. There's a glaring issue with this hypothesis. While the Voynich manuscript has been dated to the early 1400s, Bacon died in 1292. So unless Bacon faked his own death and lived to the ripe old age of 200, we could safely dismiss this first theory. In 2016, a natural language processing expert by the name of Professor Greg Kondrak decided to apply modern artificial intelligence to try to solve the mystery of the Voynich manuscript. His findings suggested that the book was actually written in Hebrew, but in an alphagram code. This type of code rearranges the letters in each word alphabetically. Kondrak's computer-assisted translation of the manuscript read the first sentence of this mysterious book as, "She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me, and people." This translation may not win any grammatical awards, but it does follow a bit of logic, especially if we take into account that the translation is of a much older version of Hebrew. However, Hebrew scholars and other academics have disputed Kondrak's theory. They claim that in order to make any sort of sense out of the manuscript, Kondrak had to make a lot of spelling corrections and adjustments to force a Hebrew translation to work. In his own published paper, Kondrak himself said that the translation required a lot of changes to make sense, and that the first attempt at translation through a Hebrew alphagram was not quite coherent. Others point to the fact that Kondrak used Google Translate to help decipher the script as a lack of scientific rigor in the study. Anyone who has used Google Translate to try to order a sandwich and then been slapped in a foreign country will probably side against Kondrak's methods here as well. The most recent theory, published in 2019, is by an English academic named Gerard Cheshire. After working on the manuscript for 2 weeks, he finally had a eureka moment when he identified the writing in the medieval codex as a Proto-Romance language, a now dead language that serves as the root for modern Romance languages. According to Cheshire, the reason this identification wasn't made earlier is that Proto-Romance languages were spoken and almost never used in text. At this time, Latin was the preferred method of writing. However, the University of Bristol, where Cheshire works, has made it clear that this theory is not endorsed by them and is only Cheshire's private research, clearly lacking confidence in the professor's theory. Academics dispute his findings as a stretch, essentially stating that Cheshire had a pre-existing theory and then tried to make the Voynich manuscript fit that theory instead of working the other way around. Lisa Foggin Davis, the executive director of the Medieval Academy of America and reigning queen of academic burns, stated that Cheshire's theory was just more aspirational, circular, self-fulfilling nonsense. You may notice that many of the translation theories regarding the book assume that a complex code was used, as the language is unidentifiable. However, many people who have studied the Voynich manuscript believe it's some kind of reference guide or wellness guide, perhaps aimed at women. This begs the question, if the Voynich manuscript is simply a 15th century version of Goop, why would it be coded so mysteriously at all? Wouldn't it just be written in Latin or another common European text of the time? After all, some of the most brilliant code crackers of the 20th century have taken a stab at the Voynich manuscript and come up with nothing. Alan Turing, known as the father of modern computer science, and perhaps more famously as Benedict Cumberbatch in The Imitation Game, tried to solve the code and failed. If the man who solved the Nazi Enigma code and helped the Allies win World War II couldn't decipher the Voynich manuscript, perhaps it isn't really a code at all. This brings up another big theory. Could the Voynich manuscript be one of the world's oldest hoaxes? It might seem ridiculous that someone would painstakingly write and illustrate 240 pages as a joke to frustrate academics 5 centuries later. The creation of the Voynich manuscript would have taken an incredibly long time in an era where lifespan was usually under 40 and TB and dysentery ran rampant. Even with multiple people writing it, the book would have taken at least 2 to 8 scribes several years of work to create. Why would anyone care to create such an elaborate hoax? Well, it's possible that writing the Voynich manuscript could have made someone a lot of money. After all, it was not unknown for mystics and cult leaders to come up with complex, incomprehensible scripts and claim they were divine, then sell them to the highest bidder. Historians point out that Rudolf II, the first presumed owner of the Voynich manuscript, was very interested in the occult and alchemy. 2 men that were around his court at the time, John Dee and Edward Kelly, were self-proclaimed mystics and publicly proclaimed con men. Could they have made up the Voynich manuscript to trick Rudolf II into providing a massive payday? Accounts at the time state that the ruler paid 600 gold ducats for the book, equivalent to about $90,000 today. Though it's never definitively been proven that Dee and Kelly sold him the manuscript, this kind of cash would have been a great incentive for the 2 fraudsters to come up with the Voynich manuscript as a hoax. However, this theory creates a major problem with the book's timeline. Though the Voynich manuscript has been dated to the early 1400s, the 2 con men didn't allegedly sell the book to Rudolf II until the late 1500s. Where was it for the previous 150 years? And if it was a hoax created by Dee and Kelly, that means that they wrote the strange, incomprehensible text years after the pages were made. So why were 240 pages of vellum sitting around blank, yet preserved for 150 years before the 2 men found them? In any case, Rudolf eventually lost his trust in the 2 men and exposed Kelly as a fraud. Things came to a head when he asked the mystic to go produce gold using methods of alchemy Kelly claimed he knew. And when Kelly tried to create gold using alchemy, he couldn't. In return, Rudolf imprisoned him in a tall tower that Kelly eventually fell out of, perhaps with assistance. The other problem with the theory is that many academics argue the writing in the book has identifiable semantic patterns. These make it more likely to be an actual language than a hoax. Other cryptographers argue that it could be a sophisticated hoax made to resemble a language pattern, and the debate goes back and forth with no clear answer or solution, as with most aspects of the Voynich manuscript. Perhaps the biggest reveal of the Voynich book so far is that academics can be a really stubborn group. So what else can be found in this indecipherable book to help us understand it? Well, there's the illustrations for one. The Voynich drawings range from plant species and planets to a series of naked women in green pools. Based on the drawings, the book can roughly be divided into 6 sections: herbal, astronomical, biological, cosmological, pharmaceutical, and recipes. Can't the drawings of plants in the book help give us an indication of where it may have been written? Weirdly enough, identifying the plants of the Voynich manuscript has only made the book's origins more mysterious. Most people believe the Voynich book was created in Italy or in Central Europe. Experts trying to match the book's plants with species common to that area have run up against many problems, including the fact that most plant drawings seem to be an amalgamation of many different species. The other issue is that some plant species may have been present 600 years ago and are likely extinct by now and therefore unidentifiable. However, one man named Arthur Tucker, who is the co-director of the Claude E. Phillips Herbarium at Delaware State University, identified 37 of the 303 plants in the Voynich manuscript and claims they are native to Central America. This theory creates a lot more issues than it solves. Mainly, how would Central Europeans create a book that identified plants in the Americas, as they wouldn't know of the Americas' existence for at least another 50 years? At this point, it seems that one of the most far-fetched theories regarding the origin of the Voynich manuscript might not be so extreme after all. What if the book is an alien creation? Let's look at the facts. It's written in a language that not a single historian or linguistic expert can identify. If it's a code, the most brilliant cryptographers in the world have been unable to solve it. In addition, some historians allege that the detailed drawings of planets and star systems in the Voynich manuscript wouldn't be possible in the early 1400s, as humans didn't yet know about some of the planetary motions depicted in the book. However, there are a few problems with that theory as well. First of all, as anyone who watched Arrival knows, if we ever do come into contact with aliens, their systems of writing, language, and communication are likely to be extremely different than ours. If aliens choose to write a codex of biology and astronomy as seen on Earth, the chances they would choose to do it with ink on vellum in what appears to be a slow handwritten style are very, very low. One would imagine if aliens had the technology to get to Earth, they would not have alien scribes doing this kind of work on paper. They would probably just be able to absorb the information and immediately mentally transfer it to everyone in the species. So, what is the Voynich manuscript after all? Was it a hoax by two con men to make money off a spiritual European ruler? A book written in code no one has been able to crack yet? Or is it an insight into a language and culture that has been completely lost to time, to the point where not one historian or linguist working today is able to recognize the only evidence of its remains? The Voynich manuscript is currently housed at the Voynich Library at Yale University, and many of its pages are available online to the public. We may never know what secrets the Voynich manuscript holds unless you, dear reader, end up being the one to crack the code. Are you up for the challenge? While you brainstorm how to show off by solving one of the greatest mysteries of all time, why not keep the watch party going? Check out this video here, and if you need even more time to think about cracking the Voynich manuscript, check out this one as well. Either way, you're gonna need more fun, informational videos before you start your mission, so click now.